Your voice no longer fits the profile of the choir, Mrs. Bennet. Pastor William's words hung in the empty meeting room like the last chord of a hymn that never resolved. The stained glass windows threw long colored bars across the table. Sunlight tasted warm on my forearms, and the dust in the air pricked at the back of my throat. My fingers closed around my leather purse until my knuckles whitened. For 65 years this church had been the shape of my life, and in that moment I could barely breathe. I am Martha Bennet, widow, choir member since I was 17, wife of Richard, God rest him, who balanced numbers at the bank and taught me how to keep a ledger in his careful hand. After he died 5 years ago, the choir became my refuge. The rustle of hymnals, the low hum before a rehearsal, the small bump of elbows when someone hit a flat note. Those sounds stitched me back together every Sunday. So when Pastor William called an emergency meeting about the mortgage, my heart dropped like a stone. They told us the bank was moving to foreclose on the First Baptist of Oak Ridge. $200,000. I saw faces go pale, hands tremble, the coffee grow cold in paper cups. This church had been the seam between generations. My parents' baptismal photos sat over my mantel. It was where I buried Richard. It was where our children were christened under the same oak beams that creak when it rains. We have a plan, I said, my voice small. I felt Richard's pocket watch in my memory, the way he would tap it when he was thinking. He had left a life insurance policy. I had been saving it, telling myself it was for some emergency like his funeral. Not for the church. They stared. Pastor William's eyes crinkled with a trained warmth. Melissa's hand landed on my arm like it was steadying a ship. The next day I signed the check. The paper was thick between my fingers. The pen left an indented trail on my palm. When Pastor William announced it from the pulpit, "Our earthly angel," he called me. People stood and clapped. The organ swelled. Melissa cried into a tissue and said I was a gift from God. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked apple pie from the potluck filled the fellowship hall. I went home feeling useful, feeling present. At first the changes were soft as hush. At choir rehearsal the following Tuesday, Melissa paused mid-score and said, "Maybe take it easy on the high parts this week, dear. Your voice sounds tired." She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I remember the way the sheet music felt between my fingers, thin, familiar, as if holding a small necessary history. Sunday brought those furtive glances. Pastor William and Rachel Young, the new council member, spoke in low voices by the coffee urn. Rachel's blazer smelled faintly of citrus and perfume. She clicked a tablet closed and turned to me with crisp polish. "We're planning some updates, Martha," Pastor William began, hands working the line of his sermon even when he wasn't preaching. "Rachel has some innovative ideas. Contemporary programming," Rachel said, tilting her head. The word landed like a brand. Her voice had that corporate clarity, no Bible cadence, no softness. She was all polished edges and efficient sentences. For a moment I stared at the pearl brooch at my collarbone, my mother's brooch, cool against my skin, thinking of how long it had sat there through baptisms and funerals and Christmas carols. Then came the phone call. Melissa's voice on the other end was small and quick. "Can you come early? Pastor William and Rachel are here." When I pushed open the choir door, the room smelled of old wood and lemon cleaner. They were sitting in a semicircle, Rachel with a leather folder and Pastor William with his Bible open like a shield. "Martha," Melissa began, fiddling with her music pin. Her fingers tapped the plastic tempos indicator and I watched them shake. "We're reorganizing the choir." Pastor William cleared his throat. The practice pastor's smile slid into place. "We need to appeal to a younger demographic," he said. His hands moved as if folding invisible papers. "We've been advised to modernize the worship experience." Rachel set the folder down and looked at me directly for the first time. "Technically, some voices register differently in the new acoustic arrangements we've planned," she said. and there was a precise, clinical cadence to it. Some congregation members have mentioned your voice can be annoying on the upper range. Annoying, I echoed, but it sounded like a stranger's word in my mouth. There was a silence that pressed against my ribs. The organ in the next room sounded faintly, someone practicing scales, 2 notes jangling in the rafters. I felt the pearl brooch warm under my palm, and for an instant I was 5 years old at my mother's knee, learning the old hymns. I could taste the coffee, feel the spring in the floorboard where I'd always put my foot when the harmonies rose. Pastor William added quickly, as if smoothing a tear on a pious shirt, "We are grateful for your financial support. Truly, this is an artistic decision." It landed like a rebuke. Afterward, I sat in the last pew while the choir rehearsed without me. The bench felt familiar and empty beneath my hands. The varnished wood held the faint ghost of other palms. Melissa avoided looking my way. Rachel chatted easily with the new younger singers, their laughter bright and corporate. Pastor William passed me in the aisle and offered a small polite nod. No handshake, no touch. In my bag I have the bank receipt and a letter from our attorney confirming the transfer. I don't want the money back. This is still the place where Richard's name is carved into the memorial plaque. But when they make the announcement tomorrow about the future of worship, I will be there. I will sit quietly, my dress pressed, my hair pinned in its usual coil, the pearl brooch catching the light. Sometimes silence says more than a hymn. Sometimes the soft weight of a brooch, and the way your hands fold in your lap can be louder than words. Tomorrow the organ will play, the congregation will applaud new voices, and I will listen. My voice may be asked to stay hidden, but I will not disappear. Your voice no longer fits the profile of the choir, Mrs. Bennett. Pastor William's words hung in the empty meeting room like the last chord of a hymn that never resolved. The stained glass windows threw long colored bars across the table. Sunlight tasted warm on my forearms, and the dust in the air pricked at the back of my throat. My fingers closed around my leather purse until my knuckles whitened. For 65 years this church had been the shape of my life, and in that moment I could barely breathe. My loves, thank you for sitting with me today. I know your time is precious, and this little channel is still taking its first steps. Every new subscriber keeps this story alive. We're trying to reach 1,000, and your click means more than you know. If this touches you, please subscribe and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. It helps us feel like a real community. I am Martha Bennett, widow, choir member since I was 17. My husband Richard taught me how to keep a ledger. He organized the world into neat columns so grief didn't. After he died, the choir became my refuge. The breath before a rehearsal, the rustle of pages, the small secret laughter when someone missed an entrance. Those sounds mended me. When Pastor William called the emergency meeting, the word foreclosure landed like a stone. $200,000. The bank papers sat on the table like a sentence. People looked at each other the way you look at a bad weather forecast, hopeless and a little embarrassed. Our church had been in my family's life for generations. My children were baptized here. Richard's name is on the brass plaque by the front door. I told them I had a solution. Richard had left a life insurance policy. I had been careful with it, saying it was for a rainy day. That rainy day came roaring in. I remember the pen, heavy, the kind you can feel make a mark, and the indentation it left on my palm when I signed the check. When Pastor William announced it from the pulpit the next Sunday, he called me our earthly angel. The organ swelled. People stood and clapped. Melissa cried into a paper napkin and called me a gift. The fellowship hall smelled like strong coffee and apple pie. For the first time in a long while I felt useful. At first the changes were a whisper. At Tuesday rehearsal Melissa paused and said, "Maybe take it light on the high notes this week, dear. Your voice sounds tired." She smiled, but her eyes were small with something like worry and avoidance. I nodded. I thought perhaps grief comes and goes in voices, that aging has its own gentle seasons. Then Rachel Young arrived. She speaks like someone used to bore. It wasn't criticism dressed in kindness. It was erasure wearing a polite smile. They added the line about my donation quickly like a footnote. "We are grateful, Martha," Pastor William said. "This is purely an artistic decision." Those words sat between us like a closed hymn book. After they left, I stayed in the last pew while the choir practiced without me. The varnished wood pressed into my palms where my fingers had left their ghosts. Melissa avoided my eyes. The young singers laughed and tuned, their voices bright and new. Rachel chatted with them about set lists and socials. Pastor William walked by and offered a polite nod. No touch, no memory of the hand that had signed the church's lifeline. I carry the bank receipt in my purse and a letter from my attorney confirming the transfer. I don't want the money back. This is where Richard rests, where our children's photos hang, where my name is threaded into the hymnals. But grief isn't only about loss. It's about betrayal too. To be thanked and then erased. This is a sting I didn't expect. Tomorrow he will announce the new direction. They will call it progress. They will clap for the younger voices and talk about growth. I will go. I will sit in my dress, pin my mother's pearl brooch over my heart like an old prayer, and hold myself straight. People will hear music and look forward. They will not know the quiet that sang inside me for decades. Sometimes silence is an instrument. Sometimes the way you sit, the way your hands fold over a brooch says more than a single note. They may ask me not to sing, but they cannot make me invisible. I will be there, and my presence will be its own hymn. A few days before the meeting that broke me, the morning began ordinary in the way that mattered most to me. Light came through the kitchen window in a thin rectangle, painting the linoleum with a warm, forgiving gold. I could smell coffee before I saw the pot, bitter, strong, the way Richard liked it, with a thin ribbon of steam rising like a small promise. The clock on the wall, an old thing Richard wound every Sunday, ticked steady and small, a metronome for the life we kept. I sat at the table with the ledger open. Richard's handwriting still lived in those neat columns, numbers marching like soldiers in his careful cadence. He taught me to keep order with a patience that felt like love. Even now, 5 years after he died, I would rest my fingers on the page and feel him there, thumb warm where he'd been holding the book. The life insurance papers were folded in the square of the last receipt, creased where he'd pressed them into my hands and said, "Keep this, Martha, for when you need it." At the time I thought need meant fixing the porch roof, or perhaps a new heater. I never imagined it meant keeping the doors of this church open. Outside, the church bell tolled 9 times. The sound carried on the damp air, low and sure, and for a moment I could feel my whole week compress around that single sound. The bell is a town clock for us. Calls people in for potluck, funeral, supper, comfort. It felt wrong to hear it ring with panic threaded through it. In the foyer of the church there is a bench, old oak, varnish worn smooth in the center, where I and so many others have paused. The bench creaks familiar song under the weight of waiting parishioners and sometimes under grief. That day, when I passed by later, the bench looked like a promise and an accusation at the same time. I ran my hand along the edge and felt the ghost of my palm where I'd always kneel before rehearsal. I remember the altar that morning. The brass cross was polished to a dull shine, the cloth beneath it ironed crisp, the one red curtain behind the choir loft hanging, in my mind, like a curtain in a theater about to open. The curtain is a deep oxblood, so ordinary, so steady, and yet when the sunlight hits it the color seems to hold a hush. That hush was part of my Sunday mornings. The hush after the organ swells and before the congregation breathes together. I thought of those little rituals as stitches. They kept things from coming apart. I made the decision slowly like you do with something sacred. I took the checkbook from the drawer, Richard's favorite pen tucked beside it, and sat with the weight of what I was about to do. The paper felt heavier in my hands than money ever does. I signed with the same neat rightward slant that Richard used to tease me about. When the pen left a shallow groove on the pad beneath, I thought of the sound of the choir, the way our voices folded together in thirds on a Wednesday night. I thought of baptisms, of holiday cantatas, of the line of children who'd once held my hand through the children's sermon. I walked to the bank the way I'd walked to 90% of the decisions in my life, quietly and methodically. The teller knew me. She slid the official receipt across like all things of consequence. Calm, bureaucratic, small. I folded it and tucked it into my purse next to the worn photograph of Richard at the Christmas pageant. His smile caught in that old mischief. I felt relieved. I felt useful. For the first time in a long while my palms weren't empty. That afternoon I stopped by the church before choir practice. The sanctuary smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and hymn paper. Dust motes moved like slow snow in the stained glass bands of colored light. In the choir loft the red curtain hung like a quiet heart. Melissa greeted me with a smile and a little nervous laugh. She smelled of lavender and coffee. For the first time in weeks the familiar rustle of music felt like a home again. We hummed scales together the way old friends test a bridge. My voice felt steady. It settled into the wooden ribs of the rafters and came back soft and warm. I remember, too, the way the younger folks filed in that night, new faces, bright shoes, newness in their jeans and their nervous tuning. Up close, the church looked younger in their presence. Not worse for wear but simply changing shape, like a family passing dishes around a table. I felt a small pang at that, a question like a pebble tossed across a pond. How would I fit now? On the way out, I pressed my mother's pearl brooch to my collar until it clicked. It's a small thing, 3 pearls in an old silver setting, but it carries 4 generations of Sunday mornings, held close to my chest like a compass. I had worn it the whole day. It felt cool and unblinking, a steady weight over my heart when I said good night to the organist and the choir members. No one knew then what the following week would hold. No one could have known that gratitude could be so easily shelved. That night at home, I emptied my purse and smoothed the bank receipt over the kitchen table as if setting a small altar. I brewed another pot of coffee and sat with the cup, steam touching my cheek. Outside the bell tolled again, once slowly, and the house hummed around me. I folded my hands over the receipt and felt the lines of Richard's penmanship in my memory. Those same lines that had guided me to do what felt right. I went to bed with the sound of him still in my head. I slept with the light on the way some nights you keep a small lamp lit if someone you love is far away. I believed, truly believed, that the church would live, that the doors would stay open, that the choir's next practice would be as it always had been. I did not know then how quickly the gratitude given from the pulpit can be replaced with the language of change and appeal. I only knew the smell of coffee, the feel of the ledger, the warmth of the pearls against my collarbone, and that those small steady things had guided my hand. The meeting room felt smaller than it had any right to be. The table was the same oak that had held committees and casseroles for decades. But the light from the stained glass made everything look thin and sharp, slats of color cutting across the papers in front of us. Pastor William's smile was a practice thing, the kind you see from a man who has learned how to make people trust words that are easier to swallow than truth. Rachel sat very still, her tablet closed like a book she hadn't opened. Melissa's fingers would not stop worrying the edge of her music pin. Your voice no longer fits the profile of the choir, Mrs. Bennet. The words were soft, almost apologetic, but they landed like a hand on my chest and squeezed. Something cold moved under my ribs. My pulse thudded behind my ears, loud and insistent. My hands always steady, closed on my purse so tight the leather creaked. I could feel the heat from the sun through the glass on the back of my neck, the faint lemon of the cleaner on the table. The room smelled like old pages and antiseptic and good intentions. Mrs. Bennet, Pastor William began again, folding his hands like a preacher about to read scripture. We've been advised to modernize aspects of our worship, to attract younger families, to better utilize our sound system. It's a strategic shift. Rachel's voice came next, each syllable tidy. Technically, with the new acoustic layout and the contemporary arrangements we're exploring, certain voices, "You mean, you don't want me in the choir?" I said, and my voice sounded small in the room where I had once led half the congregation in harmony. "We're not saying we're making space," Melissa offered, her smile brittle. "It's an artistic decision, Martha. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." Pastor William's eyes slid away briefly, like a man who can't look at the ripple he's made. "We are grateful for your generosity. What you did for the church, truly we can't thank you enough." Gratitude. The word hovered between them like garlands around a broom handle. They said thank you out loud and then erased me with other words. Their mouths moved a blessing, while the room rearranged me into someone expendable. I felt my knees go warm, as if the floor had given me permission to dissolve. Memory like a bell rang backward, Wednesday's practicing scales, the smell of apple pie in the fellowship hall, Richard's hand finding mine after a Christmas cantata. I saw the ledger on my kitchen table, his handwriting neat in the margins. I felt again the weight of the check in my palm, the satisfied trembling relief that maybe we would not have to close our doors. I remembered the teller handing me the receipt like a small sacrament. There was a fork of choice in that cold place inside me. Anger bright and hot, demanding the money back, demanding explanations, an apology that would stitch up the wound. Or the quieter, more complicated thing, keeping the donation where it was and living with what it revealed. I could already picture the headlines in my head. Widow gives, church replaces, hypocrisy whispered in the chapel. I could file for restitution. I could call my lawyer and make them feel the cost of their artistic decisions. I could walk out now and never darken the doors again, the way the organist stops playing and the building falls silent. My fingers loosened on the purse. The paper receipt folded flat against my palm like a promise. Richard's voice, not a real voice, only the echo of the way he'd looked at a balance sheet, said, "Keep what you give, Martha. You did the right thing." "Do you want the check returned?" Pastor William asked, suddenly looking earnest in the way only someone practicing contrition can look. For a moment I almost answered with the sharpness I felt, a no that would make them understand the cost of their politeness. But the memory of the bell, of the oak bench that held generations of waiting hands, held me back. I thought of Richard's name on the plaque by the door, of the kids who still came to Sunday school, of the small stubborn parishioners who counted on this place like light. "No," I said finally. My voice was steadier than I felt. "No, keep it. The church. This place matters." There was a small, awkward pause, as if they expected gratitude to bloom. Instead I felt a cold, clear grief settle over me. To give and be thanked into erasure, that was a new kind of wound. "Then," Rachel said professionally, "we'll proceed with our new arrangements." Melissa looked at me as if she wanted to reach across the table and touch my hand but was not allowed. Pastor William offered an outstretched hand that hovered and then withdrew. The only contact I felt was the pearl brooch hard against my sternum, an old compass pointing to the life I had chosen. When I left the meeting, the afternoon air hit my face like someone opening a window. My steps felt loud in the hall. I walked to the back pew and sat for a long time, the wood familiar beneath me, the varnish worn where countless palms had rested. The choir practiced without me in the loft, voices weaving around my absence like a stitch pulled loose. Tomorrow they would announce a new direction from the pulpit. There would be smiles and plans and social media posts about growth. I could leave, hold my hurt like a secret, and find another place to pray. Or I could go back, sit in my dress, pin the pearl to my collar and witness. I folded my hands in my lap and felt the receipt under my fingers, paper that spoke quietly to the kind of will I had left inside me. I had made a choice, messy and deliberate. I would not turn the money into a bargaining chip. I would not let their gratitude be the last word. I stood, smoothing my skirt, and walked out into the late light. My throat was dry, my lungs full of sound and silence. I would be there tomorrow. I would sit and listen. I would not sing, but I would not disappear. I go back to the church the next Wednesday as if I'm returning to a room where something still belongs to me. The air in the vestibule is cool. Lemon cleaner under the damp wool of my coat. I slide into the last pew, the one with the faint gouge where someone once knocked a hymn book loose. My hands fold around my purse the same way they have for decades, but they tremble now, just a little, when I press the pearl brooch against my chest. It feels like a small, stubborn heartbeat. Melissa comes in first, paper cup in hand. She smiles, but her fingers won't stop worrying the edge of her music pin. She sets down the cup 2 seats away and then, after a long pause, moves it back a little further. She never sits this far from me. "Hi, Martha," she says. Her voice is soft, pitched in the place between apology and habit. Her eyes flick to my hands, to the brooch, then up to my face and away again. The way she adjusts her glasses tells me she's rehearsed this posture plenty. "Hello, dear." I keep my voice small. I let the silence fill the space like the rest of the choir used to fill it, with warmth. She fidgets with a page of sheet music. "We've been trying some new arrangements," she offers. Her smile is a threadbare thing. Different harmonies. I watch her mouth say the words. Her thumbs rub the paper like she's erasing something. "They sound different," she adds, as if that explains everything. There's a tremor in her jaw when she says it. She wants to touch my hand, I can see it. Her whole body leans that way for a second. But she pulls back, fingers flattening against her lap like someone smoothing a wrinkle out of a truth she can't fix. "It's all right, Melissa," I say, and I press my palm over the brooch so she can see the motion. "I know things change." She inhales a little laugh that might have been a sob. "We're grateful, Martha. Truly. For everything." Her gratitude reads like a placard. It won't mend the bruise. Rachel arrives like she belongs to a different weather. Her heels are sharp against the tile. The scent of citrus follows her. She carries a tablet and a smile that was likely practiced in front of a mirror. Her eyes are quick, efficient, like someone scanning for problems to solve. "Martha," she says, and her voice is clinical cordial. She sets the tablet down with the soft click of a closing file. "We're so glad you could stop by." "There's always room," I say. It's the old answer. We always had room. She leans forward as if confiding. "We're trying to make worship more accessible," she says. Her fingers trace the edge of a stack of newly printed set lists. Live stream contemporary chords, outreach events that young families can connect with. Her eyes meet mine for less than a second. There is an economy in that look I am not invited to share. "We think the choir can be a bridge," she continues. "But bridges change when the traffic does." A small moth of indignation rises inside me. "Bridges aren't built by tearing out stones," I answer. My voice is steady. I feel the words hit the polished pew between us. Rachel's smile nudges like a measuring tape. "We want to honor everyone's contribution, Martha. We really do. But we need a sound that carries on the live stream without." She lifts a hand, perfectly measured. "Distraction." There it is again, the word distraction used like a precise instrument, not a wound. Her jaw ticks for a second, a tiny microreaction I catch because I've learned to read a face by the way it trembles when it tells a lie. Pastor William passes behind her, pausing to fold his hands like a man who's about to offer a benediction. His smile lands on my face like a practiced blessing. His eyes, when they find mine, are a notch colder than usual. "Martha," he says in that measured tenor he saves for the pulpit, "we appreciate what you did. We're moving forward in a way that we believe will serve the future of the congregation." "Which future?" I ask, almost gentler than I mean to be. The words sit like a question mark over the hymnals. He fidgets with his wedding band, the gesture small but deliberate, then answers, "A growing one. More families, more children in the pews. We need to be relevant." His hands say stewardship, his eyes say ledger. I feel, in that small motion, the memory of signature ink on the check I gave, thick paper, the press of the pen. For a flash I see Richard's handwriting, neat and sure. And the Melissa clears her throat. Maybe we can incorporate some legacy sections, she says, like someone trying to stitch a new seam onto an old quilt. Her eyes are pleading now. A lot of folks still love the older hymns. Rachel's fingers hover over the tablet. Of course, she says. We can have a rotation. Her tone is the sort that promises but keeps the power of choosing. I watch them arrange the words around me. Each smile, each carefully chosen syllable is an attempt to make what they are doing feel like a ministry, rather than a maneuver. These are small betrayals, layered with sincerity. It stings more than loud cruelty ever could. When rehearsal starts, I fold my hands and breathe with the organ. The notes come up from the floor like heat. My throat tightens as a soprano runs a scale I've sung 1,000 times. I do not sing. My presence becomes the quiet counterpoint to the new music, an audible absence. I listen to their youth, to the way they experiment with syncopation and microphones. The sound is bright. It fills the rafters in a different way. Melissa's eyes meet mine across a run of notes. She mouths a single name, like a benediction and a plea. I press my fingers into the brooch until I feel it's cool beneath the silver, and imagine the weight of 4 generations sitting on my chest. After rehearsal, when the lights are low and the rasp of the organ echoes in the rafters, Pastor William stands at the back and watches us file past. He pats my shoulder with a touch so brief it might have been a reflex. His hand leaves the warm ghost of pressure on my sleeve. We'll be announcing changes Sunday, he says. He means it smoothly, kindly, even fondly. But his kindness is a hinge that swung already. I fold my coat around me and walk out into the dusk. The bell tolls twice, soft, old, like a clock that keeps time in a town that never wanted to rush. The cold air bites, and for a moment I stand on the steps and look back at the stained glass, the cross, the red curtain behind the loft like a wound that's been ironed flat. I could go home, fold the receipt into a safe place and never return. I could make the money into a barricade, a condition, a headline. But there's something steadier in me now than anger. There is the slow, stubborn line Richard taught me: balance, not for numbers only but for conscience. So I will go back Sunday. I will sit. I will pin the pearl to my dress like an old anthem. I will listen while they call it progress. I will not sing. And I will watch how gratitude sounds when it is used to disguise the shape of erasure. And when the choir's new voices rise, I will count my own notes in silence. The odds and measures of my life will not fit into their metrics, but they live. In the small things, brooch against the sternum, the ledger's thin edge, the memory of a hand on a pen, there is still a chorus that remembers. They may try to modernize the music, but they cannot change the fact that I helped keep the doors open when they were about to close. I will be there to remind them, not with a song, but with my single steady presence. The first Sunday after the meeting felt like walking into a room where everyone knew the script except me. The foyer smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. The hymnals stacked in their racks like familiar faces. But the faces were different. People who had always come up to my pew with a hand to squeeze, a compliment about my hat, now stepped around me as if I were part of the architecture, solid and permanent but not to be touched. I stood by the coat rack, fingers worrying the edge of my purse. Mrs. Lang from the sewing circle crossed to the other side of the room and pretended not to see me. A young mother with a stroller hustled her child past, pulling the stroller a little tighter as though proximity might blur something. At the coffee table, the conversation stopped mid-sentence when I walked near, words folded back into napkins. Someone cleared their throat very loudly and pointed at the bulletin board, then laughed too loudly at a joke I didn't hear. It was in the small things that the new pattern showed itself. Fellowship Hall used to be a hum of welcomes, plates passed, hands met. That Sunday the potluck felt scattered. A church member I had known for 50 years handed me a paper plate with a smile that trembled at the edges, and then moved away like the heat from the coffee had burned him. Melissa came and went with a paper cup but never once paused to stand near me. Her eyes were careful, like someone crossing newly frozen ice. Whispers began to follow me down the aisle. Not harsh words, never that. The most damaging things were the half-sentences. They're modernizing. It's better for the live stream. We have to look forward. I heard these snippets as if through a fan blowing cold air. The sound was familiar yet distant, and always punctuated by the rustle of hymn pages, as if even the music was keeping a secret. I noticed it at the grocery store that week. Oak Ridge is the kind of place where church and Sunday errands braid together. At the market, two women with floral aprons, regulars at the Wednesday morning Bible study, turned a whole aisle the other way when they saw me. One pretended to study peas. The other checked the price of canned tomatoes as if there were suddenly a crisis. The cashier, a young man who used to whistle our cantata hymns under his breath, scanned my groceries with the polite efficiency of someone doing their job and nothing more. Doors closed before I reached them. At the outreach program where I volunteered, I arrived to find the room already in motion, and the coordinator hesitated when she reached for the sign-in sheet. "We're trying to keep the volunteer list small for now," she said like a rehearsed line. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, who stood near the back with a tablet, her expression neutral. Rachel's presence had a cooling effect on people. She could make a pause sound like policy. Children, who had always run to me during the children's sermon, began to look elsewhere. One little girl I'd held at her baptism made a circuit through the pews, choosing seats that didn't bring her past me. She peered over the top of the hymn book and then smiled at someone else. A tiny cruelty maybe, but felt like a storm. People started to invent reasons. "It's the acoustics," someone confided, with a softness like a bandage. "We're trying to make the service accessible." Accessibility was an umbrella word. Under it they hid the sharp edges. They never said my name alongside gratitude. On the church bulletin board they posted photos of new programs, youth nights, contemporary praise, images of bright, laughing faces. My checkbook wasn't shown. My name wasn't listed on any flyer. It was as if what I had done existed only in a private ledger I kept folded in my purse. The council meetings no longer included me. Invitations that once came by hand now arrived by mass email, and I found my name left off the recipient list. It was a small procedural omission, but it felt like a gate closing. Once, in the hallway after a committee meeting, Pastor William passed me with a nod so brief it could have been a reflex. "We appreciate you, Martha," he said. The words were polished in the way he polished his sermon notes. They glinted, then slid off. The choir loft became a place of guarded laughter. On practice nights I would sit in the back pew and listen, my hands folded over the pearl brooch like a rosary. The music rose and I counted the beats that used to be mine. Melissa directed with cautious smiles, her cues small and apologetic. The new members, young, bright, confidently mic'd, sang with the easy enthusiasm of starters. I felt the harmony slip past me, not violently but surely, like water finding a new channel. Rumors had teeth, they reshaped friendships. A neighbor who once borrowed sugar and returned homemade lemon bars now avoided my porch during church hours. People who had once called to see if I needed a ride home began to schedule appointments for me that conveniently coincided with rehearsal. Invitations to join quilting nights or scripture circles arrived late or not at all. One evening, as I left a funeral service, the woman who organized the interment stood at the cemetery gate and hesitated. She clutched the clipboards as if they were shields. "We'll put your name on the list for the next remembrance service," she said. Her voice held the waver of someone apologizing for weather she didn't control. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I had kept this church alive with a check and with song, but the words would have sounded like a plea, and pleading doesn't age well in Oak Ridge. The strangest part is how their gratitude, once warm and immediate, had become a public thing and not a private one. They thanked me in speeches and bulletin notes, and then arranged their lives so they could live comfortably apart from me. The applause at the service when Pastor William mentioned me was loud and sincere in tone, but hollow in reach. It did not cross the space between us. So I found myself learning a new kind of presence. The sanctuary is fuller than it ever looks on a regular Sunday. Sunlight pours through the stained glass in long warm bands and dust hangs in the air like a slow snow. I am sitting in the third pew from the back, hands folded tight so the receipt from the bank is a thin, stiff shape against my palm. My pearl brooch is cool where it presses into my chest. I can feel my pulse in my throat. Pastor William steps up to the pulpit. His Bible is a dark weight under his hand. The leather whispers as he opens it. He smiles the way he always does, the practiced tilt of a man who knows how to make people trust a voice. But today there is an edge to the sound in the front rows. I can hear it vibrate through the floor, through the soles of my shoes. His voice fills the room and the sound echoes, not like a hymn that resolves, but like a tuning fork struck and left to ring. We are embracing a new season, he says, and the words roll over the congregation. They feel rehearsed. We're modernizing our worship, expanding our outreach, creating space for youth. His syllables are neat. Each one lands and lingers. My hands are folded so tight my knuckles whiten. I breathe in. I breathe out. I am counting breaths like notes. There is a candle on the communion table, a small votive that usually burns steady. The flame is low today, a little tremble. Somewhere toward the back a door squeaks, just a slender complaining creak, and the draft kisses the candle. The flame flutters. I see heads turn, polite glances exchanged. The wind dies and the candle steadies again. A small thing, but a hush has swept through me with it, like the breath before a choir hits a sustained chord. Rachel stands a fraction behind the pastor, her tablet resting against her hip. Her voice is softer when she speaks, but it is the kind of softness that sorts and measures everything. We've consulted acoustics and digital planning, she adds. We're shifting the musical focus. We want clarity in our live stream, efficiency in our worship. We're grateful for all contributions, financial and otherwise, as we make this change. Clarity in the live stream, efficiency in worship. I feel each syllable like a weight being placed on top of me. My fingers move without permission. They find the seam of my purse and brush the edge of the receipt. It is a small paper pressed between other small things. A photograph of Richard at the Christmas pageant, the lawyer's letter folded neat. I press the paper flat so no one can see it. My breath is a metronome. Out. In. As Pastor William's cadence rises, the organ answers faintly from the loft. A low chord like a ship's horn. It vibrates in my ribs. The vibration travels up to my jaw, makes my whole mouth feel full of sound. I can feel the choir behind me shift. Young voices tuned and ready, their breaths controlled. The air is taut. Then there is a sound behind the altar. A small clatter, the quick unwanted noise of wood on wood. Heads spin. The crucifix mounted above the lectern, the one we polished every Christmas, has slipped. It tips, swings, and then lands with a dull, hollow thud against the altar rail. A hush follows like the space between verses. For the first time since I was 17, I hear the church hold its breath. Someone near the front lets out a sound that might be a laugh or a nervous cough. Pastor William falters for less than a beat and then keeps going. Change is necessary, he says, voice steady, but his hands grow small, hamster-like, around his notes. He smiles a little too bright. Our future calls for new sounds. My hands clench into each other. The pearl brooch presses against my sternum, and the old weight of it feels like a compass pointing to a truth they are trying not to see. I keep my face still. I will not give them the satisfaction of a tear. I clamp down on my breath as if I can stop the swell of something sharp inside. A woman behind me begins to whisper praise, bronze words shaped into prayer, and I can't tell if she's moved or relieved. Applause blooms at the pulpit, a soft, polite clap that turns louder as Pastor William finishes. The sound gathers momentum, sweeping like a curtain across the room. It feels rehearsed, not joyous. It is a sound meant to fill the air, to cover the empty space left where a familiar voice used to be. As the clapping continues, I imagine the candles' flame snapping and going out. I picture the crucifixes fall like a small divorce between what we were and what we're becoming. The organ swells in a bright, new progression, the kind that sounds good on a screen. The rhythm they've chosen is sharp. It has no place for the cracks and breaths that once made our harmonies human. My throat tightens until speaking feels impossible. My palms are damp. I inhale slow long 1, 2, 3, and let it out through my nose. Keep your hands clasped, I tell myself. Keep your back straight. Hold the pearl like a prayer. When the applause dies and the congregation stands to sing the next hymn, one with a syncopated beat and an amplified chorus, I do not join in. I sit very still. My absence will be a note in itself. They have thanked me. They have named me once from the pulpit. They have folded my gift into their budget, and then arranged the room so I am no longer necessary. The organ plays, the rafters swallow the new sound, and the light through the stained glass makes colored bands across the hymnals on the pew in front of me. I look down at my hands. The receipt is warm now from my grip. The pearl brooch glints as if nodding at me. I breathe in. I breathe out. For a moment, 2 beats, a bar of music. I imagine rising, placing my hand on the fallen crucifix, picking it up and setting it back straight. But the impulse is quiet and private. Instead, I press my fingers against the brooch, feel the cool metal, and I let the hymn wash over me without my voice. They have asked me not to sing. But they have not asked me to leave. The church is still the theme of my life. The silence I hold becomes its own kind of testimony. I had rehearsed nothing. I had planned no grand speech. I folded the bank receipt into the small square of my palm like a prayer, and sat very still while Pastor Williams' voice rolled on about vision, and clarity, and community growth. The words were soft and practiced. The room answered with the kind of applause that fills a picture frame and chills the air. The organ played the new hymn, bright, amplified, a thing meant to look good on a screen. I kept my hands folded over the brooch. The pearl was cool and familiar, an old compass against my sternum. I could feel the heat of all those eyes, some curious, some ashamed, some proudly oblivious. For a long time I simply breathed with the music. Then the sound of a chair scraping, a small footstep behind me. I hadn't noticed the young baritone at first. He had always been there in the margins, a shy face among the new voices. He stood now, drew a breath, and walked down the aisle with that awkward courage of someone who has learned to speak only in song. He paused in front of me like he was arranging his courage with his hands. His palms were damp. For a moment we had only the hymn between us. Then he said, softly, entirely to me, "Ma'am, may I sit with you?" His voice carried more than the polite question. It carried the memory of someone's hand on his shoulder when he missed his entrance. It held a small bridge. Melissa watched from the loft. Her hand found the edge of her music pin and wouldn't stop worrying it. When the baritone sat beside me, she mouthed a name, like a benediction and a plea. No one in the building made a sound for a beat. The organ hummed, and in that hum I heard a note that had once been mine. I could have left. I could have stood, gone to the back, gone home to my kettle and my ledger and the ledger's neat columns. I could have taken the quiet stare of retreat and closed that chapter. But something steadier than pride stopped me. Richard taught me how to weigh decisions. I had learned balance his way, one column for needs, one for conscience. The check had been written for a reason. The church was still a theme in my life. So I placed my hand over the brooch and felt the cool through skin and silver, and I spoke. "Listen," I said. My voice surprised me, low but there. It cut through the new music. This building kept my family, kept my Richard. For decades, people learned how to find each other here. My words were not a rebuke. They were a ledger entry, clear, firm, unadorned. I told a small story. The first time I led a quartet at 19, the time a child forgot the words at a Christmas cantata and I cued her like she was my own. I didn't name names. I didn't demand restitution. I only said what could be seen, what I had seen. Melissa's shoulders dropped. Her glasses slipped as if she had been holding them up out of habit. Tears stood in her eyes, gentle, unperformed. She had been complicit, yes. But she was also someone who had spent decades arranging parts, matching breaths, saving the day when a soprano misplaced a phrase. She had not wanted to hurt me. She had wanted to keep the choir alive and in that panic, had gone along with the plan that made my absence neat. After the service she found me by the back pew. Her hands were small and trembling around a folded scrap of sheet music. "Martha," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I thought I was helping." The confession wasn't dramatic. It was a thread pulled through a needle. "If you'll have me, I can set aside Monday afternoons for the old hymns. We'll invite anyone who wants to remember how to breathe together." I thought of the ledger, of Richard's slow script, of the pen that had made my signature a promise. I thought of the boy who had come to me like a bridge, and the parishioners who had walked past me all week as if my existence were a piece of furniture. I thought about dignity, how it isn't always loud. Sometimes it is a choice to stay, to name the truth, to allow others the grace to be ashamed and then to change. "No," I told Melissa, and the word surprised me with its steadiness. "Thank you." I held the receipt up for her. Not as a weapon but as a testimony. "Keep it. Use it. But don't call it progress if it means forgetting the people who built the place. Teach them. Teach him. Teach us all." That evening, a small gathering formed in the fellowship hall. 3 of the older altos, a retired Sunday school teacher, the shy baritone Melissa, and me. We sat in a circle of folding chairs. Someone made coffee. The kettle sang. We opened hymnals to the margins where pencil marks had long ago recorded breaths and entrances. The first note we sang together was small and shaky. It was not amplified. It did not look good on a screen. It sounded like hands meeting after a long absence. It was not a restoration of the old order. I did not demand my place back. I asked for something quieter. A space where memory mattered, where gratitude meant regard, where a brooch against a chest could be enough to remind people of what had been given. In the weeks after, that circle became a thing. We met Mondays. Young people drifted in, curious. Melissa began to teach with less fear and more courage. The baritone learned how to breathe without a microphone. Pastor William announced new programs, and Rachel continued to post smiling photos. The church changed in some ways, yes. But the little room in the basement hummed with the old harmonies, human, imperfect, real. I still sit in the back sometimes. I still do not sing from the loft. But when the seniors meet, and when a child forgets the words at the pageant, I will be there to cue them. I will place my hand lightly on a shoulder and show them where the rest of the story lives. The church is bigger than a headline. It is, at its best, the place where people name each other's worth quietly, one breath at a time. The week after the announcement, the sanctuary felt both fuller and lonelier at once. People came in new clothes, carrying bright reusable cups and phones already warm with photos. The light through the stained glass cut the pews into colored bars, the same way it always had. But the bars seemed to fall over different things now. Over faces lit for the camera. Over empty spaces where old hands used to rest. I sat in the last pew as I always do. The wood knew my weight. The varnish had the same familiar warmth. My hands kept the receipt folded in my palm like a small talisman. The pearl brooch rested cool against my collarbone. Every so often I would press my fingers into it just to make sure it was still there. There were new sounds in the loft. Microphones breathed. Someone tuned a guitar. The young singers hit bright notes that glowed in the rafters. They were good. They were eager. They fit into the new plan like puzzle pieces someone else had chosen. But downstairs, in the fellowship hall, Something began quietly where the announcements and the live streams did not go. Melissa brought a handful of mismatched chairs and set them in a circle. She brought a thermos of coffee, and that little tin of lemon cookies she used to hide from everyone. The baritone came early. His jacket smelled faintly of car leather and cheap cologne. A retired Sunday school teacher folded her hands and smiled like a prayer. A few of the older altos came back one by one, as if remembering an address. We met Mondays. First we sang badly. Our breath didn't match. We had rust in the places where the music used to be seamless. But the room leaned into it. We learned to listen again, to the breath before a phrase, to the way a pause could hold as much as a note. Melissa's fingers stopped trembling after a while. The baritone learned where the cues lived, not on a screen but in the chest and eye. We had no mics. The sound didn't travel far. That was the point. They kept mentioning the donation from the pulpit. The words were proper and loud and everyone applauded politely. They thanked me for saving the building and then talked about growth metrics and audience engagement. That kind of gratitude is easy to measure. It fits neatly in a report. What no one could measure was the way a hand on a knuckle quieted the tremor of a missed entrance. What no one could calculate was the lesson the baritone learned when he sat beside me and asked, very quietly, how to hold a phrase so it landed like a place, not an announcement. I taught him what my choir director had taught me at 17. Breathe low, let the sound come from the floor, listen for the next person's air. I showed him how to mark a rest like a small promise. He practiced until his voice stopped sounding like an experiment and started sounding like belonging. Sometimes Pastor William would stop by in the doorway and look at the circle. His smile was still practiced, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Rachel came once with a tablet and stayed long enough to see us laugh at a chorus we had almost forgotten. She didn't say much. She left a folder on the counter and walked out like someone who had seen something she couldn't put into a slide. I did not go back into the loft. I never asked. That was not what I wanted. The loft had become a place where my voice, for reasons they called artistic, no longer fit the curve of the sound they wanted to make. I had given the money that kept the doors open. I had not given up the memory of my own voice. Week by week the Monday Circle became a small thing with a life of its own. A college kid came once because he wanted to learn hymns for his grandmother. A young mother brought her son and let him scribble in a program while we sang. They brought their curiosity and their apologies and sat down. The room filled with different kinds of singing, careful, rough, generous. It was not meant for a screen. It was meant for people leaning close enough to hear each other's breaths. On Sundays I kept sitting in the back. I kept the brooch pinned where my mother had worn it. Sometimes people slid into the pew next to me and offered a quiet word. A few of the faces that had avoided me slowly returned to their usual softness. Others did not. Change makes itself known by small omissions as much as by new offerings. There were days when I wanted to stand up and tell the whole story from the pulpit, the ledger lines, the signature, the way a pen had trembled in my hand and then steadied. There were days I imagined asking for the check back and making them feel the weight of their politeness. I did not do those things. Instead I used the small power I had. I taught, I cued. I held a hand at a children's pageant when a child forgot the words. I kept showing up. One late afternoon in autumn, I walked out of the church after a rehearsal and paused on the steps. The wind had a hard edge to it, the kind that speaks of coming cold. Behind me the door closed with a gentle thud. It sounded like an ending and like a promise at once. I listened to my footsteps as I walked down the path. They receded into the street, steady and measured. I turned and looked back only once. The stained glass glinted in the low sun. Inside, through the door's small window, I could see the circle in the fellowship hall, a bright blot of shape and sound. Melissa waved at me with a napkin and mouthed, "Come Monday." I smiled and adjusted the brooch at my throat. The pearl warmed under my fingers. My shoulders felt a little lighter. I didn't need to sing from the loft to keep the church alive. Sometimes keeping a place alive meant tending to the small rooms that hold people together when the main stage moves on. The door shut behind me again. The wind pushed, and for a second the latch sang. My steps carried me down the weeks after the announcement taught me something I hadn't expected. That presence is a strange kind of gospel. People kept saying thank you, and the thank you lived in the air like confetti, visible for a moment then swept away. But the small rooms, the hands that reached for mine at a pageant, the Monday circle of folding chairs, those were where grace kept breathing. I learned to read the new language of the church. It arrived in phrases like live stream clarity and appealing to younger demographics, in tablet slides and polished smiles. It smelled like lemon cleaner and new coffee cups. It sounded like a guitar tuning in the loft and microphones tapping against stands. Those things aren't bad. They're progress. But I have known progress that trims and forgets, and there is a hollow place where memory used to sit. So I made a decision that felt small and enormous at the same time. I did not ask for my check back. I folded the bank receipt and tucked it into my purse like a talisman. I could have demanded that gratitude mean more than a mention from the pulpit. I could have filed papers, made noise. But Richard taught me how to balance a ledger, how to weigh a rightness that isn't about headline victories. The check was meant to keep doors open. My choice was to keep a different kind of door open too. Sitting in the back pew became a devotion. The varnished wood wore the shape of my palms. The pearl brooch at my collarbone warmed against the rhythm of my heart. I watched the new choir from the pew, felt their bright notes wash across the rafters, and kept my silence like an instrument. My silence was not defeat. It held memory. It held witness. There were small reprieves. The shy baritone, the one who had learned to steady himself when he missed an entrance, came and asked me plainly if I would teach him how to breathe through a phrase. He did not care about livestream metrics. He wanted to learn how to hold a hymn so it landed like a place, not an announcement. Melissa, who had looked away in that meeting, came back with a scrap of sheet music and an apology that trembled in her hands. We set aside Mondays and practiced the old hymns the way people return to a porch swing. Slow, clumsy at first, then true. Those Monday nights were a small rebellion. No microphones. No cameras. Just breath and the way a chord can settle into a room and make it honest. Young faces drifted in, curious. An old alto remembered a cue she'd forgotten. A college kid learned a hymn for his grandmother. We made a place that didn't fit neatly on a slide. Fit people. Not everyone came back. Some friendships cooled like evening air. Invitations stopped arriving as often, but others softened. A neighbor who had avoided my porch now stopped to ask about my garden. A child I'd baptized tugged my sleeve the week after, and wanted to learn the song for the Christmas pageant. Those small returns were a kind of redemption I hadn't expected. I never demanded the loft. I never wanted the podium. What I wanted was to keep the seam intact, the small ordinary stitches that make a building a home. A hand to guide a soprano. A steady cue at a child's moment of panic. A place where elders are counted, not archived. That work doesn't make good copy. It doesn't trend. But it keeps people from falling out of the verses. There were days the hurt sat behind my ribs like a stone. I would press my fingers against the pearl and remember the scrape of Pastor Williams' practiced smile, Rachel's tablet cold efficiency. Hypocrisy is a soft thing, draped in gratitude, wrapped in artistic decisions. And it stung more because it came from people I had trusted. Still, anger rose and I let it settle into something I could use. A lesson about where belonging actually lives. In the quiet moments, I would read the little ledger that Richard left me and trace the lines of his handwriting. He would have called it balance. I called it stubbornness. I had given what needed to be given. I would not let that gift be the measure of my worth or the reason I was made small. So I kept showing up. I sat in my dress. I pinned the brooch to my collar like prayer. I listened when the organ swelled for a new arrangement and I sat silent when their bright voices filled the room. I taught when asked. I held a child through a missed entrance. I let young singers sit beside me and learn the way to breathe. Presence is quieter than applause, and it lasts longer. People still talk about the donation from the pulpit. They still post the same smiling photos. They call it stewardship in progress. That will continue. But in a back room on Monday nights, our little circle grew patient and brave. The baritone learned to carry a phrase. Melissa stopped worrying her music pen. The hymnals grew smudged again with pencil marks and sighs. At night I fold the receipt into a small square and lay it by the bedside. It is not a ledger I use to weigh people. It is proof that I acted when I had the chance. The church building is still standing. Children still know where to come when they need a place to sit. The hymn I taught that shy boy still echoes in his voice on Sunday. And the thing I have kept most carefully is simple. I did not leave. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.